Picture the hottest desert on Earth. No power lines for 100 miles, the sand hot enough to cook on, and sitting right in the middle of it, a block of ice that refuses to melt. No electricity, no machine, no cost, just a device people built more than 2,000 years ago, and then somehow we forgot it existed. I found this while chasing something else entirely, and I could not let it go. Because if a farmer in ancient Persia could keep ice frozen through a summer that hit 110 degrees, why am I paying every single month to do the exact same thing? That question sent me digging through old engineering records, university studies, and one Persian structure still standing in the desert today. And what I found near the town of Yaz changed how I see the humming box in my own kitchen. Stay with me, because the final piece of this puzzle is something you can build this weekend with things already sitting in your home. Let me start where I started, with the thing that did not add up. I was reading about how people survived desert summers before refrigerators. I expected to find suffering, warm water, spoiled food, people just enduring the heat. Instead, I found the opposite. I found records of ancient Persians serving chilled desserts in the middle of summer, cold drinks, ice treats flavored with fruit and rosewater, in a place where the daytime heat could kill a man walking without water. That stopped me cold. How do you make something cold in a place with no ice and no machines? It felt impossible. It felt like a myth someone had exaggerated over the centuries. But it was not a myth, because the buildings that made it possible are still standing. They are called yakhchāls. The word means ice pit in Persian, and when I saw the first photograph, I actually leaned closer to my screen. Imagine a giant cone of mud brick, some of them 60 feet tall, rising out of flat desert like an enormous beehive. From the outside, they look like something from another planet. From the inside, they were the most advanced refrigerator of the ancient world. The oldest written references to these structures go back to around 400 years before the Common Era, 2,400 years ago. People with no electricity, no compressors, no chemistry as we know it, built machines out of dirt that could freeze water and hold it frozen through the hottest months. And here is the part that got under my skin. These were not rare, they were everywhere. All across the Persian plateau, in what is now Iran, and stretching into other hot, dry regions, these ice houses were simply part of normal life. Ordinary people used them. This was common knowledge. The way you and I know how to use a freezer, they knew how to use the desert itself. So I had my first clue, and a much bigger question. If this was normal, if this was everywhere, if it worked so well that it lasted for centuries, then where did it go? How does something that useful just disappear from human memory? I kept pulling the thread. And that is when the story stopped being a curiosity and started making me a little angry. Because the more I read, the more I realized this knowledge did not fade away on its own. It did not simply get forgotten because people lost interest. It was pushed out, it was replaced, and the timing of when it happened tells you exactly who benefited. Let me show you what I mean. For thousands of years, staying cool and keeping food from spoiling was something you did with your own hands, using materials that cost nothing. Clay, water, sand, shade, airflow. Every culture and every hot part of the world had its own version of this knowledge, passed down from parent to child for free. Nobody owned it, nobody sold it, it belonged to everyone. Then something changed in the early 1900s. The first electric refrigerator marketed for the home showed up around 1913. A few years later, in 1918, a company called Frigidaire started selling refrigerating units to households. Then in 1927, General Electric released a model with a round unit on top that people nicknamed the monitor top, and it sold by the hundreds of thousands. Now here is what I want you to notice. Selling a refrigerator to a family is a one-time payment. But a refrigerator that runs on electricity, that is a payment every single month, forever, for the rest of your life. The moment cooling required a machine that required power, cooling stopped being free. And to sell that machine, you have to do one thing first. You have to make people believe the old freeway was primitive, backward, something to be embarrassed about. The advertising of the 1920s and 30s did exactly that. It painted anything that was not a shiny electric box as dirty old-fashioned, and beneath a modern family. The clay pot on the porch became a symbol of poverty. The ice house became a relic. Within 2 generations, knowledge that had survived for 2,000 years was nearly wiped from memory, not because it stopped working. It never stopped working. It was erased because someone realized there was more money in a method you rent forever than in a method you own for free. That is the part that keeps me up at night. The physics did not change. The desert did not change. Water still behaves exactly the way it did in ancient Persia. The only thing that changed is that we were taught to forget, but knowing something was buried is not the same as knowing how it worked. And I needed to know how it worked, because a mud cone that freezes water sounds like magic until you understand the science. So I dug into exactly how these ancient machines pulled cold out of thin air. The answer turns out to be beautifully simple, and it rests on one fact about water that most people never think about. When water evaporates, it takes heat with it. Not a little heat, a lot of heat. To turn liquid water into vapor, water has to absorb a huge amount of energy, and it pulls that energy from whatever is around it. That is why stepping out of a swimming pool on a breezy day makes you shiver even in warm air. The water on your skin is evaporating, and as it leaves, it carries your body heat away with it. The ancient builders understood this in their bones, even without the modern words for it, and they built their entire system around it. Here is how the yakhchāl worked. During the freezing nights of the desert winter, they would channel water into long, shallow pools shaded by high walls. Deserts get bitterly cold at night because the dry air holds no heat, so even in regions that bake by day, thin sheets of ice would form on those pools after dark. The workers would harvest that ice, break it up, and carry it into the great cone. Underground, beneath the cone, was a deep pit. The thick mud brick walls at the base could be 10 feet thick or more, and they were built to block heat from ever reaching the inside. Layers of ice were packed down into that pit, insulated with straw, and sealed away from the sun. But packing ice into a hole is only half the trick. The real genius was keeping the whole thing cold through summer, and for that they used 2 more free forces. The first was the tall cone shape itself, which pulled hot air up and out through a vent at the very top, so the warm air was constantly being carried away, the way heat rises out of a chimney. The second, in many of these structures, was a windcatcher, a tall tower with openings that faced the wind, funneling any breeze down into the chamber below, and passing it over water so that evaporation stripped the heat out of the incoming air before it ever touched the ice. Cold night air to make the ice, thick earthen walls to guard it, a rising cone to vent the heat, a windcatcher and evaporation to chill the air. 4 free forces working together, and not a single one of them costs a penny to run. I sat back when I fully understood this, because I realized these people had built a refrigerator out of nothing but their understanding of how heat moves. No moving parts, no fuel, no monthly bill. It ran on the desert itself, and there was one detail that told me just how clever they really were: the mortar. The walls of these ice houses were coated with a special waterproof plaster the Persians called sarooj. It was made from a mixture of sand, clay, lime, ash, goat hair, and egg whites, blended in specific proportions. This mixture was so resistant to heat and so completely waterproof that it kept the melting ice from soaking away and kept the outside heat from creeping in. Some of these coatings have survived in the desert for centuries and are still intact today. That is not primitive. That is engineering. That is a recipe refined over generations by people who understood their materials better than most of us understand the appliances in our own homes. So now I had the how, but a giant 60-foot cone is not something you or I can build in the backyard. And that raised the question that mattered most to me. Was this power to make cold from nothing only available to people who could build a monument? Or did ordinary families have a smaller version, something that fit on a kitchen floor? Because if there was a small version, then everything I had just learned stopped being a history lesson and started being something I could actually use. And that is exactly where the trail led next. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right about now. This is a fascinating story, but it is not for you. You are thinking you do not live in a desert. You do not have a windcatcher. You are too busy or too set in your ways, where you do not have any special materials lying around. You are already deciding this is interesting to watch, but not something you will ever do. I put this next part here specifically for you, because what I found next needs nothing but 2 flower pots, some sand, water, and a cloth. It costs nothing if you already have these things, and almost nothing if you do not. And it works in an ordinary home. Tonight, let me tell you about the man who proved it to the modern world. His name was Muhammad Ba-Abba, a teacher from northern Nigeria. In the region where he lived, most families had no electricity and no way to keep food from rotting in the punishing heat. Vegetables spoiled in a day or two, families were losing food they could not afford to lose, and children were getting sick from produce that had gone bad. In the mid-1990s, he remembered the clay pots his grandmother had used, and he decided to test the old evaporation principle in the simplest possible form. He took a large clay pot, placed a smaller clay pot inside it, and filled the gap between the 2 pots with wet sand. He covered the top with a damp cloth. That was the entire device. He called it the pot-in-pot cooler. Here is what happened. The water in the wet sand slowly seeped through the porous outer clay and evaporated into the dry air. As it evaporated, it pulled the heat out of the inner pot, exactly the way it stripped heat from those ancient ice houses. The inside of that inner pot stayed dramatically cooler than the air outside. That question led me straight to the final piece of the puzzle, and it is the part I most want you to hear. If you have been following this investigation and want to go deeper than what fits in a single video, I have written all of this out in full in my books First Winds, Deep Leverage, and The Full System. Each one picks up where the last leaves off, walking you through the forgotten principles behind energy, food, and household independence, with the evidence laid out clearly and the practical steps spelled out in full. You can find them linked in the description below. They are the long form of everything I research here for the people who want the whole picture, not just the surface. But first, let me be honest with you about the money, because this audience does not respond to vague promises, and neither do I. And the numbers were not small. Tomatoes that would normally rot in 2 or 3 days stayed fresh for up to 3 weeks. Peppers that spoiled almost immediately lasted for weeks. Spinach that wilted in a day held for over a week. In tests, the inside of the pot ran many degrees cooler than the surrounding air, cool enough to change everything about how a family could store food. His work spread across Nigeria and beyond, and in the year 2000 he was given a major international award for it, for rediscovering something that was never actually lost, only forgotten. A device with no moving parts, no power, and no cost that any family could build in an afternoon. Now let me tell you how to make the everyday version in your own home, because you do not need the desert and you do not need a fancy setup. Get 2 clay pots, sometimes called terracotta pots, the plain unglazed kind you find for planting. The glaze matters because you want the plain porous clay that lets water seep through. One should be smaller so it fits inside the larger one with a gap of an inch or 2 all the way around. If the smaller pot has a drainage hole in the bottom, plug it with a cork or a bit of clay so your food stays dry. Fill the bottom of the large pot with a layer of sand so the inner pot sits at the right height. Then set the inner pot inside and pack the gap between the 2 with sand. Now pour water into the sand until it is thoroughly wet all the way around. Lay a damp cloth or towel over the top. Then place the whole thing in a shaded spot where air can move around it. A shaded windowsill, a covered porch, a spot near an open window with a breeze. That airflow is what carries the evaporation away and keeps the cooling going. Add water to the sand once or twice a day to keep it damp and re-wet the cloth on top. That is it. Inside, you now have a cool chamber for your vegetables, your fruit, your butter, your eggs, running on nothing but water and moving air. There are 2 rules that make or break it, and I want you to hear them clearly. First, it must be in the shade. Direct sun will fight the cooling and win. Second, the air around it must be dry enough to allow evaporation and moving enough to carry the moisture away. In a humid, still room, evaporation slows down, and so does the cooling. In a dry room with a little airflow, it works beautifully. That single fact, that evaporation needs dry, moving air, is the key to the entire method, and it is exactly the same principle that ran those ancient cones. I tried a simple version of this myself before I would say a word about it to you, because I did not want to repeat a claim I had not tested. I set up a small pot-in-pot on a shaded ledge with a breeze. Within a couple of hours, the inside was noticeably, unmistakably cooler than the room. My hand felt it the moment I reached inside. No cord, no bill, just physics that has been sitting there patiently for 2,000 years, waiting for me to remember it. Ugh. And that is when a new thought hit me, one that turned this whole investigation up a notch. If a couple of clay pots can do this much with nothing, then the humming box in my kitchen is not doing anything magical. It is doing the exact same job the desert does for free and charging me every month to do it. So how much is that really costing me? And is there a way to cut that cost using this same forgotten knowledge without giving up my refrigerator at all? A refrigerator is one of the biggest energy users in the average home, running every hour of every day, year after year. Depending on where you live and how old your unit is, it can cost anywhere from around $50 to well over $150 a year just to run that one appliance. Over the 15 or 20-year life of the machine, that is hundreds, even thousands of dollars, quietly leaving your account to do a job that dry air and water can do for nothing. Now, I am not going to tell you to unplug your refrigerator. That would be foolish, and I promised you no empty promises. But once I understood the principle, I realized something. The ancient method and the modern machine are not enemies. The forgotten knowledge can make the modern machine cost you less. And that brings me to the final piece I uncovered, the one that ties this entire investigation together. While I was going through older records on how these evaporative systems were designed, I kept coming across the same detail about the windcatchers and the ice houses. The people who built them understood one principle that we have almost completely lost, and it is this. The cheapest cold is the cold you do not let escape, and the second cheapest is the heat you carry away before it ever arrives. Let me show you what that means for your actual home this weekend, because this is the part almost nobody talks about. The ancient builders never put their ice pits in the sun. They buried them, shaded them, and wrapped them in those thick sarooj-coated walls, because they knew the enemy was not the absence of cold. The enemy was the arrival of heat. Every bit of heat they blocked from getting in was cold they did not have to make. Your refrigerator lives by the exact same law, and almost everyone gets it wrong. Here is the finale technique, and it comes in 3 parts, all of them free. First, find where your refrigerator sits. If it is next to your stove, next to your oven, in direct sunlight from a window, or crammed tight against a wall with no space to breathe, it is fighting a losing battle every hour of the day, exactly like an ice house built in the open sun. Every degree of heat pressing against it is heat its motor has to pump back out, and you pay for that in electricity. Move it away from heat sources if you can, pull it a few inches off the wall so air can flow behind it, and shade it from any direct sun. The ancient builders would have understood this instantly. Second, and this is the part straight out of the old evaporation and airflow principle, go to the back of your refrigerator and find the coils. Those coils are how your machine sheds its heat into the room, the same way the cone vented hot air out the top. When those coils are caked in dust, the heat cannot escape, and the machine runs longer and harder to do the same job. Studies of refrigerator efficiency have found that dirty coils can drive up energy use significantly by a meaningful chunk for no reason at all. Pull the machine out, unplug it, and brush or vacuum those coils clean. It takes 15 minutes, it costs nothing, and it is the single most overlooked thing you can do. Do it a couple of times a year. Third, the oldest trick of all, the one the ice house masters lived by. Keep the cold from escaping. Every time warm air rushes into a cold space, the machine has to chase it back out. Check the rubber seal around your refrigerator door. Close the door on a piece of paper and try to pull it out. If it slides out easily, your seal is leaking cold air day and night, and you are paying to cool your kitchen. A worn seal is like a crack in the wall of the ice house. Clean those seals, and if they are cracked or loose, replace them. And keep your refrigerator reasonably full, because a full fridge holds its cold far better than an empty one, the same way a packed ice pit held its chill longer than a half-empty one. The mass itself stores the cold. Do you see what just happened? The exact same 4 principles that ran a 2,000-year-old machine made of mud, block the incoming heat, vent the outgoing heat, stop the cold from leaking, and store cold in mass, are the exact four things that decide whether your modern refrigerator drains your wallet or sips gently from it. The knowledge never died. It was just waiting inside a machine we were told to plug in and never think about again. That is the whole secret. The people of ancient Persia were not primitive. They understood heat and cold at a level we traded away for the convenience of a switch on the wall. They built devices that made ice in the desert and held it through the summer, using nothing but earth, water, and air. And a Nigerian teacher proved in our own lifetime that the smallest version of that knowledge, 2 clay pots and some wet sand, can still change how a family lives. We did not lose this because it stopped working. We lost it because someone made more money teaching us to forget. The physics of a cold night, the pull of evaporating water, the rise of hot air through a cone, the shelter of a thick shaded wall, all of it is still true. All of it is still free. It has been sitting there this entire time, in the desert, in the old records, in a grandmother's clay pot, waiting for someone to pull on the thread, and now you are holding the end of it. Here is what I want you to sit with tonight. You were never as dependent as you were led to believe. The cold you pay for every month is the same cold the desert gives away for nothing, and the difference between the two is knowledge that was quietly taken from you, one advertisement at a time. You just took a piece of it back. If you are the kind of person who would rather understand how something works than blindly pay for it forever, the kind who trusts evidence over marketing and common sense over convenience, then you already think like the people who built these things. This was never about clay pots. It is about refusing to be kept in the dark about things that should have stayed simple. So let me ask you one thing, and I genuinely want your answer. Did you know about the windcatcher? The tall tower that pulled the breeze down over water to chill the air before it reached the ice? Had you ever heard of it before today? Tell me in the comments below. And if you have an old trick from your own family for keeping food or a home cool without power, write it down there too, because that is exactly the kind of knowledge that gets erased if we do not say it out loud. This audience does not comment much, so I am asking you directly. Take 10 seconds and leave one. If you want to keep pulling these threads with me, subscribe and stand with the people who are quietly recovering what was taken from us, one forgotten method at a time. Because next I am investigating something even stranger. There was a way people kept milk fresh for over a week in the summer heat with no ice at all, using one common item they dropped right into the container, and the reason it worked was hidden in plain sight the whole time. I found the old record that explains it, and I cannot wait to show you. I will see you there. Before you go, one more thing. Inside my membership, I walk you through the full yakhchāl build, wall by wall, so you can make one yourself. And when you get stuck, you ask me right there, and a real person answers, not a machine. You won't be doing it alone either. Come belong with the Practical Wisdom Circle. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime with one click. Come join me.